What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by a very special guest, Cody Alexander of Match Quarters. How are you, Cody?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Really appreciate the time, man. For those of you who don't know, Match Quarters is the absolute best place to go online to learn about defensive football. Cody, now, you've been doing this a couple of years now. Is that right?
Yeah, 2016 was when I first started posting on Match Quarters.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And earlier this morning, you had a piece go up kind of taking apart Jeff Hafley's simulated pressures against the Texans. I'll link to that in the description of this video. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about his approach, simply because, I mean, he was asked about it a little bit yesterday during his press conference. I just find it fascinating, this idea of being able to get home and on occasion with, scot-free rushers, nothing in their way on their way to the quarterback, but only usually ending up while rushing only 4 bodies.
Right.
I mean, this is a thing that we've seen Brian Flores do a bunch of this in Minnesota. But do you know what's the genesis of this? What does this come out of? Is there a system it lives in, or how did this kind of land on the NFL landscape?
Yeah, this actually, I'm going to give you a little bit of history lesson.
Please.
So this actually goes back to the 70s with Bill Arnsparger. And so the original fire zone pressures, or what are called replacement pressures, were from that 53 defense, where you bring a linebacker who is off the ball from one spot and you drop a person from the other. And so it's kind of this replacement pressure, but you're still rushing the same. You keep your coverage integrity. In fact, Arnsparger called it safe pressures. Mm-hmm. We go fast forward to Dick LeBeau, and Dick LeBeau's out here doing stuff from the secondary. So he added the secondary iteration. It really is the one that made it famous. So what people have started doing is, well, we have these overload pressures, but we still want to have these kind of 7-man distributions on the back end. And so what you end up doing is you create, just off of protections, you're trying to create run-throughs like you were talking about in these natural alleys that occur in these typical protections, right? And so the one that I highlight in the video, and that probably most people remember, is the one with the safety that just comes scot-free off of the edge and just hammers the quarterback. And
McKinney's being sacked.
Right. And in the video, I kind of highlight, there's literally 3 people blocking one defender. And so what you're doing is you're creating movement across the face of these linemen, and you're able to keep somebody off the edge. And so that's essentially what it is. There's a multitude of different ways to attack different pressures, but that is essentially what it is. You're trying to manipulate the protection off of the presentation, and then you're only going to rush 4, and that's where the simulated pressure comes in.
One thing I noticed, you mentioned, it's interesting, the offense kind of ending up, a bunch of dudes blocking one guy, right, or the running back, and this is something Hafley alluded to in his presser, as far as staying in to obviously try and help in protection, but that takes him out of going out into a route. Although there is I think it's the second sack on your video that shows the back initially thinks, oh, I've got no responsibility. So he tries to get out on his route. And by the time he does, the quarterback's on his back.
Right.
It's fascinating to me the way that, especially in this game, and you highlight a little bit of it, Hafley was able to play with their protection calls as far as what their rules are, especially along the interior, it seemed, where the one that really gets highlighted, I think, and I saw this live and I thought, okay, this looks like they're really kind of fooling the back, and you do a great job of pointing this out. The initial kind of slam into the line by Cooper on Wilson's second sack, he's not even trying to get after the quarterback. He's literally trying to slam into the center, and as the first man through, the back working traditionally inside out, right? He's taught, okay, I got to make sure I get that guy. And by doing that, you've got 2 offensive players dealing with one guy who's not even trying to get to the quarterback.
Right.
And all of a sudden you have Wilson loop around completely scot-free. I mean, those are the things that it really seems like Hafley is starting to get a beat on as far as what the opponent's protection is.
Yeah, and to go back to the running back part, it changes the math defensively for you. So if you think of it as a math problem, if I only have to defend 4 receivers, then now, and I have 7 in the distribution, it really just changes the math for you. So when they add that running back, now it's 5, 7. I got to figure that out. Maybe I can't double the guy that I want, just the spacing doesn't work out. So when you can do these simulated pressures, or when you can get the back, the other thing with the running back is the fact that they're not, most of them are not really good blockers. And a
Right.
lot of
Very
tight
true.
ends now are not great blockers, because we're getting a lot of flex tight ends. Not everybody
Right.
has a George Kittle who is as good as a left tackle at blocking, even pass pro, as he is running routes. Those guys, there's a reason why he's one of the best in the league. And they took advantage of that against the Texans, of just the fact that the tight end really was not a great blocker. Running backs are the same. Think about it like an unskilled person. They're going to do the first thing that they're told to do, right? And they're just going to make sure that they do that correct. So that running back's like,
Right.
I have this linebacker in the protection. I'm going to block
Right.
this guy. Well, the next thing you know is he's ear hole in your center or your guard, and
Right.
you're going to follow him, and you're going to make sure you block him. The next thing you know, you've picked the guy that they've tried to pick, and he comes free. So that's really where those pick plays come in.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the tight ends too, because it was fascinating to watch some of the pressures that the Packers put on tape, because there were times where, as the game went along, the Texans legit kept tight ends in, specifically because, look, we're having problems. We can't protect. But that almost helped the Packers as far as they widened their kind of front. And again, there are multiple times where they add that tight end, but he's almost wasted. And he's, again, helping a tackle block a guy who, thank you very much, because now we've got an extra body free.
Yeah. And that's the thing with, like, I've been noticing this trend in NFL offenses of where they're like leaving tight ends. I mean, like, how many times this year have we seen TJ Watt get a sack because somebody's like, we're going to one-on-one
Oh
him
my
with the tight
God, right?
end. It's like,
What are we doing?
yeah, that's right. And two, like you mentioned, the width part of it is really interesting, because what you're doing with width is you're essentially trying to make the guard play like a tackle. Most guards in the NFL aren't that way. And then also, if you want to leave the tight end, we're giving you even more width for that tackle to work. And so it just plays into, like you said, it just plays into the movement part of it, and then just allowing that defensive end to beat a tight end.
One thing you mentioned in your video that I found interesting, simply because I've had the exact same thought. You mentioned the fact that we watched what Hafley did on Sunday against the Texans, and it's like, I really expected to see some of that earlier in the season. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that's a byproduct of trying to get home with 4 early on in the year, watching your guys not really be able to do it with any kind of regularity? So now he's kind of turned up the heat, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one is that the system that he's trying to run is emulating kind of like the 49ers, the Texans on the other end, kind of the Jets system. And so what do? They don't blitz a lot. They try and hit home with 4. But I also think too, and we talked about this in the offseason, there's so many young players on this defense. He doesn't really know. I really think that, like, with McKinney playing so well, then you have Williams, who has just really come on, who I think is going to be a future star. And then Bullard being able to play in the nickel. You now have 3 safeties. He can now start doing some things that he didn't need. Then you also have the young linebackers. You're figuring out who can play, who can't, who's a good blitzer, who's not. Now he kind of has an idea. So now we're starting to see a little bit of this. And it goes back to manufacturing the pressure and being able to change the look and doing different things for offenses. So it's nice to see that we're starting to see him lean into that pressure package we thought we were going to get from his Boston College tape.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the thing too. He kind of mentioned that in his presser about, like, I don't think I'm ever going to be what I was at BC as far as sending numbers. And I think that's understandable in an NFL world where they're a hell of a lot more talented on that side, the other side of the ball. One thing that I've kind of been wondering since this game, since the Texans game, because they were so successful against a pretty darn good quarterback, right? CJ Stroud is no slouch, but Stroud's other game this year where he struggled was against the Vikings and Flores in a very, very, I want to say, similar approach, right? Same style of defense, lots of kind of numbers games, if you will. What's the worry there? Because, like, you've seen last year where Flores' defense started hot And then by the end of the year, now some of that was injury driven, but certainly by the end of the season, it really seemed like teams had not maybe figured it out, but they found the soft spots. They found the counters, so to speak. And it almost feels like maybe you're starting to see that transpire again with now we've seen a couple weeks here against the Vikings with Ben Johnson, and then last night, Sean McVay certainly seemed to have a few more answers. And I know those are two of the best play callers, play designers in the league, right? Like, good luck if you don't have one of those guys, but sure feels like we're kind of headed that way again. And that brings me back to Hafley and maybe the judiciousness of not trying to utilize it too much, but being able to lean into it against specific opponents if they think it's advantageous.
Yeah, and that's the thing you mentioned about the Vikings in particular of doing kind of the same things,
Right?
And teams are figuring that out, being able to take advantage, especially the last 2 weeks. Do you want to be judicious with the way that you use these? These are not simulated pressures and these pick pressures. If you use them all the time, people are going to be able to kind of mitigate it.
Right.
So you want to change it up every week. You want to have a different look every week, and that's what you want, and that's hopefully what Hafley will do.
Yeah, that's what I expect to see, especially a couple weeks away from a bye week. They'll probably reset, look at stuff, what's working, what's not. To your point, I think, there's no doubt that the continued development of Evan Williams, Javon Bullard, the young guys, Cooper as well at linebacker,
Yes.
I think that will only kind of open more doors, when I can trust these guys in a way that maybe he didn't feel comfortable with the first few games of the season.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And really just the secondary in general is the key component here. Being able to move those guys around and trust that they're going to do what they're going to do, but then also changing the matchups and the looks, that just keeps everything fresh and that helps the pressures.
Absolutely. Cody, I cannot thank you enough for hanging out, jumping on, just talking some defense. It's always a joy. Make sure you check out his work. I got a link in the description of this video. Match Quarters. It is the spot to go to online if you want to learn about defensive football. Cody, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me on.